Welcome to the first ever ASF CONNECT video conference. This program is part of a new series of virtual programs for members and friends of the American Swiss Foundation, which we created in response to the coronavirus pandemic this spring. We are honored to bring to you today a conversation with two distinguished speakers, Ambassador Dennis Shea and Martin Naville, who's joining us from Switzerland today on audio only. Ambassador Shea will join us on video. And I'd like to remind everyone right at the beginning that the call is subject to the Chatham House rule. I am Patricia Schramm, the president of the American Swiss Foundation. Our mission is to connect and engage Swiss and American leaders through innovative programs. We do this in normal times by hosting in-person events. Many in our audience are familiar with our flagship Young Leaders Conference in Switzerland that takes place every year. We also host more than a dozen events bringing together the leaders of our two sister republics. Today's program was envisioned as an in-person event, a luncheon in Zurich, in fact, part of what we call our Great American Speaker Series. It would have taken place literally today, on September 18, about 6 hours ago, co-hosted and organized by the Swiss American Chamber of Commerce. I very much regret not to be able to see you in person, but as an optimist, I see a silver lining. The virtual format allows us to welcome many more people than we would have had in a room in Zurich. And we're delighted to have almost 150 viewers with us right now. Some of you have sent us questions for the speakers and they have been forwarded. And now it is my great pleasure to welcome the chairman of the American Swiss Foundation, Robert Jifra.
Thank you, Patricia, and it's great to be here with everyone today. This is our fall season of the American Swiss Foundation Connect series, and we're really looking forward to it. The first season in the spring was a great success. As Patricia mentioned, you can now at least see the speakers, and I'm here in my office in New York City. I'm wearing a suit. It still fits, fortunately, although I haven't been in my office much lately, although I'm starting to come back. Reports of New York City's demise, I think, have been exaggerated, and I think times are becoming back to normal. My daughters and my son are back in school in person, and it's really great to be with you all. I want to thank Martin Naville, who is the CFO of the Swiss American Chamber of Commerce, who has been a devoted member of the foundation, for his support. You know, I've known our speaker for 25 years, Ambassador Dennis Shea. And, you know, it's a sign that you've become old when your friends become ambassadors. I always thought of ambassadors as being like really, you know, sort of like Gilbert and Sullivan type of ambassador, not someone who, you know, I used to go, who I knew when I was in my 30s. And we're really delighted that Ambassador Shea is here. My wife, Joyce, and Dennis worked for the great American Senator Bob Dole in the 1990s. And Senator Dole just had his 97th birthday on July 22nd. He is a great American patriot, and he is still you know, working hard to make the world a better place. Now, Senator Dole was a great judge of talent, and he would have made a great president. And he really picked the best staff, and one of his favorites was Ambassador Shea. Now, Ambassador Shea and our president, President Trump, have something in common. They're actually both from Queens, New York, and from Forest Hills, Queens, which is a really great part of Queens. One thing they don't have in common is where they went to high school. The president, as many of you may know, went to a military academy. I think he had some problems in grammar school, and his parents packed him off to a military academy. Ambassador Shea went to a school called Regis. Another graduate of Regis High School is Anthony Fauci, who has been much in the news over the last 6 months. Regis is one of the best schools in the United States, and certainly in New York. It's a Jesuit high school. Ambassador Shea then attended Harvard. He has 3 Harvard degrees including a law degree. We won't hold the law degree against him. And he served in the Bush II administration as an assistant secretary in HUD. He also spent 11 years as a member of the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, which was set up by the Congress of the United States to sort of evaluate U.S.-China relations. And he obviously knows a lot about probably one of the most important trading relationships the United States has, and one of the most contentious. And now he is one of the most important members of the Trump administration. You know, there are a lot of people who really make the government work, and there's the people who you sort of see on television and you read about in the newspapers, and the people who actually make it work. And Ambassador Shea is one of those key officials in our government. He is certainly in the room where it's happening, and he is key to the trade issues that are so important to the current administration. So it is my privilege, honor, to introduce my friend, Dennis Shea, Ambassador to the World Trade Organization. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bob, for that very, very generous introduction. And thank you for mentioning one of my favorite people, Senator Dole, and thank you for mentioning one of my favorite institutions, which is my alma mater, Regis High School. And please say hello to Joyce for me. And thank you, Martin and Patricia. And Martin, I'm sorry that we're unable to have lunch in Zurich. I would much prefer that than doing this virtually, but I do appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation with you in this format. So look forward to the next 30 minutes or so. Thank you.
Excellent. Ambassador, thank you very much indeed, dear Dennis. Welcome to virtual Switzerland, which has the great advantage of no quarantine to go into virtual Switzerland. I apologize for the technical problem. I can just certify that the business relationship between Switzerland and America is apparently working a lot better than the technological bridges between those two countries. So let me dive right into WTO. WTO is in Geneva. Most of the Swiss couldn't name an achievement of WTO in the last 10 years. It seems that since Cancun, I think that was 2006, the things have not moved terribly well, and the Doha round, obviously, which was kept alive for a very long time, didn't produce any results. Now, question to you, I mean, that's viewed from outside and certainly a very unfair description. Where do you see today's role of the WTO, and where do you see this organization heading in the future?
Well, thanks for that question, Martin. I mean, the WTO, as you know, is supposed to be the leading international organization to develop trade rules agreed to by the members of the WTO. And there's three separate functions that the WTO has. One is supposed to be a permanent forum for negotiating trade liberalizing agreements. Secondly, it's supposed to be an organization that promotes transparency by monitoring the trade practices and policies of the 164 WTO members. And the third role or function of the WTO is to help resolve disputes among its members and hopefully resolve them in an amicable fashion. On each of these three functions, the WTO is falling very, very short. With respect to the negotiating function, there's been one multilateral outcome over 25 years, over a 25-year period, and that was the Trade Facilitation Agreement. And there's been no multilateral outcome that actually promotes market access and reduces tariffs over that same period. With respect to the transparency or monitoring function, too many members fail to fulfill their notification obligations, or obligations to tell the other members what they're doing with respect to trade practices and policies, and that harms the negotiating function. So that pillar, the monitoring function, is also not doing very well. And the third function is the dispute settlement function, and unfortunately, a part of that dispute settlement system, what is known as the Appellate Body, I'm sure many people on this phone call have heard of the Appellate Body, has really veered off course. in ways that the United States has outlined in ample detail, both substantively and procedurally. So, the United States, my immediate boss is the USTR, which is Bob Lighthizer, back in 2017 at the ministerial conference in Argentina, called out the WTO for the need for reform and highlighted some of these issues. And today, everybody, that's the mantra in Geneva, WTO reform. And we're now in the process of selecting a new director general, and all of the candidates have made commitments to reform the WTO. So the point I want to make is the WTO has a great promise, but it's falling very short. The reform process has been initiated largely by the United States because of the US leadership. And now the question is, what does WTO reform mean, and how do we achieve it going forward? So I hope that gives you a little sense of the role, what we see the role of the WTO and how it's falling short today.
I would like to dive into the role of America in the WTO, but let me ask you two questions first. One is, like many of the multilateral organizations, the WTO also works on a unanimous decision. In other words, Vanuatu gets the same vote as the United States or Germany or others. Do you think this is a structure that is still feasible if you look at the purported goals of the WTO? Can we continue with this unanimous decision, or will the reform bring some kind of majority decision process?
I don't see. The consensus principle is deeply rooted at the WTO, and I don't see any movement away from that. But you're right to highlight the fact that achieving consensus, which means in WTO terms means unanimity among the membership, is very difficult, particularly in a situation where you have members with very divergent views on some fundamental issues.
Excellent. So if we look at the US, I mean, the US was, the founding father of such organizations, has been the major payer of those organizations, and has been extremely instrumental to set down the rules that are not just important for the US, but certainly important for the Western world and far beyond. And I don't think this is just the current administration. It seems that the US has lost some interest. I mean, I remember President Obama getting out of UNICEF, that America has lost a bit of interest in contributing a major role in those organizations. How do you see the role of America in generally in multilateral organizations, especially in this reform of the WTO?
Well, thanks for that as well. First of all, we're the top contributor financially to the WTO and have been for the past 20 years as a country. But the U.S., contrary to some press reports, is very actively engaged at the WTO on the ground. We have a great team of people working out of our mission in Geneva, and we are supported by another strong team of people in Washington, D.C., who help our work and feed into our work. And on the one multilateral negotiation going on at the WTO, that's the fish subsidies negotiation. The United States is a leader in that discussion. I just participated in a meeting this morning. We have 5 separate proposals that we've introduced in that discussion, which put together could achieve a very strong outcome in this one multilateral negotiation that is going on now. On the plurilateral front, the United States is heavily engaged in what is known as the e-commerce or digital trade plurilateral. We're seeking a high standard agreement in the digital area, whose importance obviously has been highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're seeking a high ambition outcome where we ensure flow of data, easy flow of data across borders, prohibit data localization requirements, prohibit companies being forced to hand over source code, making sure that digital products are not discriminated against, ensuring that there's a continued moratorium on customs duties for digital transmissions. So we're heavily involved. The WTO is also an organization with tons of committees, dozens of committees, And in all those committees, you'll find a representative of the US at the desk, actively contributing in a positive manner. And the United States, frankly, is one of the few countries at the WTO who takes the accessions process to the WTO, the process where a country who wants to join the organization. We take that very seriously and look at acceding countries' trade and economic regimes to make sure that they can fit into the WTO framework. So I just want to make sure you understand, and the folks on the call understand, that we're very much actively involved on a day-to-day level at the WTO. Now, if you have time, we have a very robust agenda for reform, which I'd like to share with you, but I can do that now. Give me a few minutes. I mean, the first thing. By all means, please. Okay, thank you. The first thing we're doing is, okay, everybody's talking about WTO reform. So we need to go back to first principles. What is this organization about? And for the United States, the WTO is about free and fair trade rooted in market principles. There should be market-oriented conditions among the members of the WTO. That's what we should have a general adherence to that ideal. So we've put forward a proposal, a statement, working with Brazil. Switzerland has said some positive things about our statement, other like-minded. So we're pushing that forward, we've already done that. We're going to move that proposal forward in the coming months. Secondly, we are engaged in what is known as the trilateral process with the EU and Japan to expand the WTO rulebook to cover things like industrial subsidies and state enterprises and forced technology transfer. So that process is still ongoing, and the goal is eventually to share our approach on those issues with a broader group of members of the WTO. Early in the call, the third area that we're pushing on reform, the United States is frankly leading a transparency drive at the WTO. We have as I mentioned earlier in the call, too many members do not fulfill their existing obligations to notify the rest of the membership about their trade policies and practices. So we have put forward a proposal, and I'm joined by other countries, Australia, the EU, Japan, other WTO members, to say, look, if you're a member here, you have existing notification obligations. If you need help writing the form out, fulfilling your obligation, seek out technical assistance, and that will be provided. But if you repeatedly and willfully fail to fulfill your existing obligation, there should be some consequences. So we're pushing that proposal forward at the WTO. Many of your listeners may have heard of something called special and differential treatment. At the WTO, you can be a member and self-declare as a developing country. And when you self-declare as a developing country, you're entitled to special and differential treatment, which could be in the form of carve-outs from the rules, exceptions, transition periods to get to fulfill the rules. And unfortunately, a number of advanced countries, advanced economies, and large traders, including countries like China and India, claim that they are automatically entitled to special and differential treatment, no matter what. And this has had a very negative impact on the negotiating function at the WTO. So the United States has put forward a proposal which says if you're a member of the G20, if you are a member of the OECD, if you're a high-income country as determined by the World Bank, or if you're responsible for 0.5% or more of global merchandise trade, you can call yourself a developing country, but you're not automatically entitled to special and differential treatment during current negotiations or in the future. So we're pushing that forward as a reform element. And on the dispute settlement, the point we make on the dispute settlement side is if the WTO is a rules-based organization, then the appellate body should follow the rules. Unfortunately, the appellate body, whether it's not breaking the 90-day rule for issuing appeals, adding rights and obligations, insisting its rulings of precedent absent cogent reasons which do not appear in any agreement, the appellate body has failed. So we are engaged with other members, and we've written a very lengthy report which we've shared with the membership about how the appellate body has gone off course, and we're seeking to engage with the membership on the concerns that we raised. I mean, frankly, on dispute settlement, there's a fundamental difference between certain members who view this appellate body as an international court with judges that create jurisprudence, common law, and countries like the United States and others who view the appellate body as a much more limited institution, simply responsible for quickly reviewing questions of law by the panels. But no one, I have to say, no one has been more constructively engaged on the appellate body issue by explaining our concerns than the United States. So I'll leave it at that. So I hope you see, Martin and the others in this call, that the U.S. has a very extensive reform agenda at the WTO.
Okay. Sounds good. You know, the Beatles had a song about this, 8 days a week, if I remember well. That's the kind of work, I guess, you have on your plate, 8 days a week.
Yeah.
Let me jump to the critical part. I mean, you mentioned China a few times, and we read a lot of things in the news about, you know, the China's work in WHO, WTO, and here especially about WTO. How do you see the role of China, A, currently in the WTO, and second, in the reform process?
Well, you know, China as the second largest economy and largest exporting nation is a very important, has a very important role and very important player on the international trading scene. Unfortunately, our view is that the Chinese non-market economy, its Chinese economic system, is fundamentally incompatible with the norms of the WTO, and that existing WTO rules are simply incapable of disciplining some of the non-market practices engaged in by China. So one of the first things I did when I came to Geneva, we circulated a paper called the Trade Disruptive Effects of China's Economy. We circulated that to the membership as a way to educate the membership about how the Chinese system is simply incompatible with what we thought the WTO was about. I mean, the United States has brought at least 23 cases against China through the dispute settlement system at the WTO. Of course, over the past 15 years, we've had many dialogues and conversations with the Chinese, the JCCT, the SED, all these various configurations, and we simply have not moved the dial. I will say, with respect to the U.S. reform agenda, the Chinese oppose our market-oriented conditions statement or proposal. They think multiple economic systems can safely, comfortably fit within the WTO framework. They say new rules on industrial subsidies and state enterprises are off the table. They publicly opposed our notification proposal to improve transparency. They are against our proposal on special and differential treatment and insist that they are entitled to special and differential treatment as a matter of right as a developing country. And from what I have observed, they appear to continue to support the status quo with respect to the appellate body. So
let me take this one further. If I look at, you know, the other views in China and the unanimous decision process, do you see in the future some room for further liberalization of trade, or are we now in a defensive game where, you know, every effort has to be done just to not deglobalize trade and leave it at least at the current level?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that point. Of course, there's, you know, much further room to liberalize trade. My boss, Bob Lighthizer, recently had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal calling for a greater trade liberalization. He points out in the op-ed that from 1947, when the GATT was signed, to the conclusion of the Uruguay round in 1993, there were 8 successful multilateral rounds of trade negotiations that actually, reduced tariffs. But since 1995, when the WTO was founded, there has been no such multilateral negotiation that actually promotes more market access and reduces tariffs. So Ambassador Lighthizer has called for a tariff reset and has proposed that all the members reduce their tariffs to a certain benchmark rate along the lines of many of the industrial countries, which have tariffs in the low single digits. So we'll see where that goes. But that was a new concept, new idea that Ambassador Lighthizer raised in his recent op-ed. So there is room. That's the answer. Short answer.
There is room. But if I may, further the question: do you see any concrete movement from this proposal? I mean, friends and supporters for this proposal from Robin Lighthizer, or are people sitting on the bench?
Well, it's too soon to tell. It's a relatively, when you're at the WTO, you realize that things do not occur at the speed of light at the WTO. It's not a matter of weeks, a matter of months. It's often a matter of years before things get accomplished. So I did discuss the op-ed with a number of my ambassadorial colleagues, and they thought it was a very thoughtful piece. And so we'll see. But we'll think positively. Okay, let's think positively, Mark.
Great. Let's cross our fingers on this one because it's really, really important. Now that you're sitting in virtual Switzerland currently, what do you think Switzerland could do in the WTO on top? I mean, we're obviously the host, and we are hosting the whole world, and I'm paying this with my taxes, obviously. But what else, could we do to further what is really important for the Swiss economy?
Well, let me just say I have a really good relationship, I think, with the Swiss ambassador to the WTO, Didier Chambovet, and he is a well-respected member of the diplomatic corps, at the WTO. And I know the United States really appreciates Switzerland's leadership in a number of issues, particularly in the area of the customs duties, maintaining a moratorium on customs duties on digital transmissions. I know it's in the U.S. interest, it's in Switzerland's interest, it's in a lot of our interests, and we think it's in the developing world's interest to maintain this moratorium. But Switzerland, under Didier's leadership, has led that effort, and we very much appreciate it. I'll say, on the fish subsidy negotiation, where Switzerland really doesn't have many equities involved, since I don't think you provide any fish subsidies for ocean-going vessels. But
nope.
But Switzerland is very active and positive and constructive in this effort, because it realizes that it's the only multilateral negotiation that's going on now, and Switzerland recognizes that it's not just about fish sustainability or the oceans, it's about the institution of the WTO, and to show that the WTO is in fact capable of reaching a multilateral outcome. So we appreciate Switzerland's help on that. Switzerland is also the convener of a group of about 30 or so nations called the Friends of the System. So these are countries that state that they support a strong WTO. And I've had conversations with Didier. It would be helpful if Switzerland, as the leader of the Friends of the System or the convener, supported our proposal on special and differential treatment, supported our proposal on notifications, supported our proposal on market-oriented conditions. It would be helpful if we got support from Switzerland in that regard. And when I see Didier next, I'll tell him I said this on this call. But anyway, we have
give him my best regard.
I will
give him my best regard. He's a great guy. I worked with him in his previous job. Very nice guy.
Yes.
So let me ask you to shed your diplomatic persona and tell me on a personal note. You've been in Switzerland now some time. How do you like Switzerland? How do you like the Swiss?
Well, first of all, when you get off the plane in Geneva and you're surrounded, I guess, by the Jura mountains, you realize what a beautiful, stunningly beautiful country it is. And if you drive around Switzerland, it's just full of eye candy, you know, so that's number one. It's a beautiful place. Secondly, the Swiss people are very open to outsiders. It's an international country, so I guess it comes naturally to the Swiss people, but I have been welcomed very much by the Swiss people that I have encountered, and I appreciate it. The third thing notice is that the place works. Whether I've been to the doctors a few times and dentists, and so it's healthcare, public transportation. It's a country that works well. The fourth thing you notice is that it's pretty expensive, and I guess that's the price. I guess that's the price you pay for the first three good things. But it's really, I have to say, Martin, it's been a real privilege for me and my wife and daughter for had the opportunity to live in Geneva, to live in Switzerland, and it's definitely, these are memories that we're going to cherish throughout our lifetime. So thank you.
Great. We'll make you honorary member of the Swiss Friends Club or whatever.
Okay.
Great to hear that. We are running out of time, unfortunately. I mean, this is really exciting. You know, I think even I have learned a lot in this 30 minutes, even though I'm looking pretty closely at those kind of institutions. I think in the name of everybody who participates today, we're wishing you and the US a lot of luck with this reform. I think it's crucial that the WTO gets back in this, you know, into this leading role for liberalization of trade globally, and clearly, I mean, there are a lot of challenges waiting for you, for us, for all of us, and so we're wishing you all the best, a lot of success, a lot of patience. I understand also that this doesn't work without patience, but certainly something that you will have a great result, and we will do whatever we can do on our side. And so I think you get the last word, Dennis, and then if you hand it back to Patricia.
Well, I really appreciate this opportunity, Martin, to share the views of my country, the United States, and our efforts at the WTO. It's great to interact in this way, and I want to thank Bob again for those really generous and fun comments at the outset, and thank you to Patricia for putting this together. So thank you.
Well, let me thank you then, Ambassador Shea and Martin, for a wonderful exchange on this program, for your insights on these important topics. I hope everyone enjoyed this program, and I would like to express especially my gratitude to the sponsors and the members who make all of our programs possible at the American Swiss Foundation. If you are interested in learning more about membership, please visit our website. And join me again in 2 weeks on October 1st for a preview of the upcoming US elections with representatives of 2 swing states, both alumni of our Young Leaders Conference. We are honored to feature the Speaker of the House of Florida, Representative Chris Sprowls, a Republican, and State Senator Chris Larson from Wisconsin, a Democrat. And I know it's going to be a great program. Members will receive an invitation with details next week. This concludes our program today. Thank you so much for joining us.